You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
We like to begin with the white-hot topical news. And, the topical news is, very sad, that Doug Ingle of Iron Butterfly had died last week. How bizarre to be thinking about Iron Butterfly. Do you remember? I can vividly remember In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida.
Were you a fan? Were you a fan?
Well, I liked that record very much, actually. And I remember hearing, I didn't own the album. A mate of mine had the album, and we used to play it, and I thought it was really good. And it had a certain kind of, it was the ultimate heaviosity, wasn't it? Iron Butterfly.
So, place it in context for us. So, when are we talking about? It's the late 60s, isn't it?
68 would it have been, I think?
I suppose so, something like that. They had one freak enormous album, didn't they? And which is In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, which is actually supposed to say In a Garden of Eden.
But he was so pissed when he was writing it. That's right. The guy came and said, "What's the name of the song?" He said, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, and that became it, didn't it?
And it's interesting because they're emblematic of that very brief period in popular music history where the coolest way to come up with a name for a band was to put together an adjective and a noun that were incongruous in some way.
Oh, yeah.
The classic case, Grateful Dead, Led Zeppelin.
Yes.
Heavy Jelly.
Yes.
Mighty Baby. Iron Butterfly. There are no doubt loads more. It was like...
Sweet Poison. I can remember that. Yes.
It was just that odd juxtaposition of noun and adjective. That was considered to be adequate shorthand for kind of admitting you to the pantheon of psychedelic heaviosity, wasn't it? that was just the case. And Iron Butterfly ruled supreme for about a year, didn't they? Really,
they did. They were huge
in that era. With that record, we were only talking about Iron Butterfly not long ago when we spoke to Steve Howe from Yes. Because the key moment, this is a kind of wandering classic word in your ear conversation. I do apologize for the fact that it doesn't appear to be going anywhere in particular, but we take the scenic route at all times. They supported Iron Butterfly on some tour of Europe, I think. And Iron Butterfly were breaking up at the end of it. And so Yes bought their PA, which is a very big thing to do in those days. You know what I mean? Because very few bands had their own PA. And so, Yes suddenly had this, top of the range, state of the art American PA system, which made them sound better than just about anybody else playing in Europe. So it really gave them a leg up. Anyway, but Iron Butterfly only flourished for a brief period of time. And do you know what one of the odd things about Iron Butterfly for me was the fact that they were on Atlantic Records. And it is one of the most extraordinary things when you think about it, that Atlantic Records have been started by Armitage and Herb Abramson, at the end of the 40s, the 50s. And the whole Atlantic story was built on black music, on Ray Charles, on the Coasters, on the Drifters, and, Aretha Franklin, all that kind of stuff. And it was black distributors, black radio stations, it was a completely black network. And then at some point in about 1967, they realized that the future was going to be in selling rock LPs to white students. And so they executed one of the most dramatically successful repositionings in the history of rock and roll. This is like Trojan Records suddenly deciding, I'll tell you what, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to be something different. And so within a very short period of time, they signed Cream. They signed Led Zeppelin.
They signed Led Zeppelin supposedly after the success of In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. Wasn't that right?
That might well be the case.
I think it was. They suddenly thought, this is ridiculous. Because Ahmet Ertegun was very funny about it because he didn't rate them at all.
Not at all.
And they'd recorded, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida was a 17-minute track, and I think he complained about the fact it was so badly recorded. And at one point, the drummer drops his sticks, and they don't even bother to re-record it. It's just oh, never mind, it's fine.
Iron Butterfly were brought to them, sorry to interrupt you, by two figures who I'm surprised aren't more famous. I'm surprised they haven't had books written about them. Two guys called Charlie Green and Brian Stone, who were real hustlers. They insisted on producing records themselves, even though they couldn't produce at all.
Yeah.
But they managed, get this, Sonny and Cher. Now, Sonny and Cher for about a year were the biggest thing in the world, weren't they?
Massive.
So Sonny, they signed Sonny and Cher. They signed Buffalo Springfield. They signed Dr. John, and they signed Iron Butterfly. And so all these things, one way or another, ended up at Atlantic Records. Just delivered them in a skip, pretty much. Did you order a load of psychedelic white adventurers? Yeah, we've got a load here. And by that fluke, that's how they ended up with Stephen Stills via Buffalo Springfield, which is how they ended up with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. So they could not have been more fortunate. But
let's say all this traces back to Iron Butterfly. Maybe that's what got the ball rolling. It's quite possible.
I think it probably did, because Iron Butterfly opened the door with radio stations with
FM radio.
FM radio, because In the Garden of Eden was the classic track you could play. You could put it on and play while you went off and had sex with your girlfriend, which was the major requirement, wasn't it, for programming in the late 60s on those kind of programs. It was just long enough, that track.
This list is a story relating to a well-known late-night British DJ of the early 70s who used to do this.
I don't think he's the only one by any means. That was the one drawback of the LP record, wasn't it? It didn't last all that long, really. Yeah. And so 17 minutes was just about perfect, wasn't it?
But then it was such a hit on FM radio that they did the kind of 4-minute edit, didn't they, or whatever, which was a massive hit single. I thought it was just an extraordinary story. And also Doug Ingle himself, classic case of somebody who made a huge amount of money. I've forgotten how big they were. They sold millions of records. He bought at one point various properties, including a 600-acre farm, a ranch. And then suddenly the tax man came calling, and he spent, poor old guy, had to kind of resize rather rapidly and spent much of his life managing a recreational vehicle park in Los Angeles and being a painter and decorator. So he'd gone from that enormous. It reminds me so much of Chris Salovich at the NME telling me about Greg Lake and how he interviewed Greg Lake, who was living on an enormous estate in Devon, with lakes and grounds and, incredible pomp and ceremony and kind of suits of armour. And the next time he saw him, he was in a semi-detached in Wimbledon. He said, as he went through the door, he had to squeeze past the sole remnant of that, which was a suit of armour, which he kept from this thing. So again, he'd kind of overspent and hadn't kind of realised the tax bill was coming.
Well, that's classically what happens with rock stars, isn't it? They spend the money and then the tax bill comes 4 years later or something, doesn't it? And all the money's gone.
There's a rude awakening. Yeah.
Well, because by its very nature, you earn a huge sum of money in a very short period of time and then literally nothing for a long time.
That's
afterwards. Right. And so it's somewhat difficult to organise.
We should talking about stories of old rock stars.
We love them. Go on.
We love them. We love them. There was something that you and I were talking about the other day. You'd stumbled across a newspaper cutting about the death of Dwayne and Greg Allman's dad.
I never knew this.
Incredible story.
I never knew.
I mean, I knew the bare bones of it, that he'd been murdered by a hitchhiker, but I didn't know the circumstances of what happened. Tell that story. It's absolutely astonishing.
So the story is his name was Willis T. Allman, and he's the father of Greg and Dwayne, who must have been born in the late 40s, I suppose.
Yeah, they were born in 46, 47, I think.
Okay.
So they were amazing. I think Dwayne Allman was 3 when he died, and Greg was 2. And that really makes you think.
So he had a very distinguished military record. I think he was involved in D-Day, of course.
Yeah.
We're coming up to
Omaha Beach, I think.
We're coming up to, well, there you go.
I think it was, yeah.
No hotter place in the history of warfare than Omaha Beach. And, you know, so what's that, 80 years? Yes, 80 years.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah, 80 years this year. And anyway, when he came back and married and had two sons, the army, he stayed, was in the army or the Air Force? I can't remember. Saying lieutenant. He was in the army. He was in the army. And he was such a kind of poster boy that they got him a job in recruitment. You know what I mean? He was, you know, in those are the days when there used to be recruitment officers in every town in both the UK and USA, didn't it? With uniformed soldiers in there, you know, come and sign up, laddie. And he was traveling with somebody else between venues, and they picked up a hitchhiker. And they
went back to a bar, didn't they? They played shuffleboard. They befriended
the hitchhiker, yeah.
And they had a few drinks, and then they'd offered to give this guy a lift home.
And he pulled a gun on them.
Yeah, he said, I live in this place just down here, just turn right to the right. Took this really remote place in a kind of wood, down a little track. Then he got out, pulled a gun, and robbed them. Made them lie down on the ground. Didn't he?
This is like a scene out of a movie. That lying face down on the ground.
And then he I think Dwayne's dad, the Allman father, turned to him and said, "Please don't shoot us, buddy."
Yeah.
At which point, this guy changed his tone completely because his nickname was Buddy, wasn't it? Yeah. He therefore thought that they knew his name, and at that point, again, got quite aggressive. And I think the Allman father tried to get up.
They were struggle over the gun. He
shot him and killed him.
Shot him dead.
Just because he thought that he knew his name.
Yeah.
Which is just absolutely astonishing. It also makes you think about the Allmans. Those guys grew up age 2 and 3 with no dads. So the general lawlessness of their approach to life made a lot more sense, actually.
Absolutely.
They looked uncontrollable, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. They did. And it's extraordinary, once again, you know, every time we talk about Duane Allman. How old was he when he died? 27, I think. He was 27, wasn't he? And yet, look at what he'd done by the time he was 27 musically. It was absolutely extraordinary. So, that's one of the most ghoulish footnotes in rock history I've ever come across.
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
There may be people, Mark, listening to this thinking this is important and valuable work. If only I could help in some small way. Well, there is, Mark, isn't there?
It is, and they can. They just have to go to our Patreon site. It's patreon.com/wordinyour-ear. And there you'll find all the details of all the entertainment that we offer, and also all the various benefits you get from signing up, getting it early, getting the quiz on Friday nights. Particularly, we have every Friday night there is a live quiz with international participants, which is extremely good fun and quite a challenge. And all the other entertainment we offer is there, isn't it? Patreon.com.
So why not see how you can get involved? Patreon.com/wordinyour-ear. This week I was thinking about Tom Waits' Rain Dogs, Mark. And somebody pointed out to me, I think the internet pointed out to me actually, that that's another case of a record that is part of what we might call an accidental trilogy. So what are the three? What are the two either side of Rain Dogs?
Well, that'd be Swordfish Trombones, and then Frank's Wild Years after it, wasn't it?
Right.
I think 4 years between them. So that's three amazing records just in following each other.
But it's also the idea that they're probably made by largely the same crew, and they got largely the same aesthetic, and so. It does seem to be the case that when you delve into the the annals of rock history, you do find these cases. And particularly you found them in the past where people used to make many albums. You used to make albums, pretty much as quickly as they make singles nowadays. And I actually listed a load of these quite some years ago that, Scott Walker, between 1967 and 1969, made 3 albums called Scott, catchily, Scott 2, and get this, Scott 3. And they were mainly made up of other people's songs. There were Jacques Brel songs and some of his own songs as well. But they all had a very similar feeling to them. And you could kind of play them together, you know what I mean? And so that makes a bit of a trilogy. There's also the Beatles psychedelic trilogy, which is, I suppose, Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper. Would you say the same thing about that?
I think that's possible, actually, yeah. Rubber Soul, amazing. Nowhere Man and Girl and In My Life, Looking Through You. I mean, you could also argue you could do Sgt. Pepper, the White Album, and Abbey Road. Well, they don't have the same kind of consistency of sound, but
no, and they're less like group albums, aren't they?
And Bowie, I think probably Lowe, Heroes, and Lodger.
People talk about this as the Berlin trilogy, don't they?
Yeah.
But Lodger, I don't think Lodger was made in Berlin, was it? But they tend to be associated with Berlin. There's the Neil Young Ditch trilogy that people talk about.
Yes.
Time Fades, which I think does work as a trilogy, really. Time Fades Away, On the Beach, and Tonight's the Night. There's
Stevie Wonder.
Stevie Wonder.
Talking about Innovisions, and what was the one after Innovisions?
Fulfilling this first finale. Which is, and they're very similar. It's made by they're all made with Tonto's Expanding Handband, aren't they? They're made with different instrumentation that they've never used before. And they were pretty much all made together. It was the one just ran totally into another. He didn't come out of the studio in those years. And then there's the ones that are a trilogy by reasons of kind of mortality. Nick Drake.
Well, that's a trilogy. Only made 3 records within a short period of time, and all of them absolutely phenomenal. So that's completely self-contained, isn't it? I think there's a possibility you could argue Blur's Modern Life is rubbish, which is not bad for tomorrow. There's good songs, Park Life and The Great Escape. Steely Dan, surely.
Steely Dan, definitely. You see, Countdown to Ecstasy, Pretzel Logic, and Katie Lied.
Yeah.
Because and it kind of works because the first Steely Dan album, the singer is somebody different, really, mostly. It's David Palmer. Whereas those 3 Steely Dan albums really feel like a band, and by the end it's session players and so forth. Whereas those 3 you can play together, they do sound like the same band, really. Nick Lowe, of course, the Brentford trilogy.
Nick Lowe, those are incredible. You talk about this, The Impossible Bird, Dig My Mood, and The Convincer. Would that be right?
Yeah.
They're amazing records because they're all in the same aesthetic.
Yes.
Which is kind of that crumbling sensibility of a bloke getting old and feeling life, things slipping out of his control. They're really touching, very funny records.
You see, isn't Nick Lowe an almost unique case of somebody who got better as he got older?
Got better as he got older? Well, I don't know. Leonard Cohen, possibly. But then Leonard Cohen was terrific early on. Leonard Cohen, I think his later records were even better than his first ones.
They were better produced, weren't they, probably?
Yeah, they just had more resonance. Yeah. But Nick Lowe, rare example of somebody, you really want to hear his later period stuff. Although the good stuff's terrific. Smiths are good, I think, a possibility. The Smiths album, Meat is Murder and the Queen is Dead. That's a great trilogy.
Right.
And Leonard Cohen, songs of Leonard Cohen, Songs from a Room and Songs of Love and Hate. That's good. Songs of Love and Hate with, Avalanche and Famous Blue Raincoat.
What about Bob Dylan's Geezer trilogy from between 1997 and 2006? So you got Time Out of Mind, Love and Theft, and Modern Times. They all sound to me like the same record.
They're the same record, absolutely. Again, that sort of woody, acoustic, organic sound. They're amazing. I think you could argue that Another Side of Bob Dylan, Bringing It All Back Home, and Highway 61 is a trilogy, or possibly Bringing It All Back Home, Highway 61, and Blonde on Blonde.
Yes,
I don't know. Blonde on Blonde. Then again, Blonde on Blonde, which I listen to a lot, it's a bit baggy, isn't it? You know, it's a bit samey, but it's just a beautiful sound. Those hang together, I think.
Yeah.
Because Elvis is telling, My Aim Is True, this year's Model and Armed Forces, brilliant. Armed Forces is a great record.
That's true.
And obviously, Dave, I have to pitch in here for the incredible string bands, 5,000 Spirits, The Hangman's Beautiful Daughter, and Wee Tam and the Big Huge.
Okay.
Because those are absolutely immaculate records. And before that, they were a kind of folk group. And after that, it all became complicated and tangled and wasn't terribly good. But those three in a row were just phenomenal.
There's just something about the power of three, isn't there? Really?
Yeah, there is.
You know, that three is as long as people can kind of hold it together, isn't it?
Yes,
really?
it is.
And
I don't think Simon and Garfunkel ever did it. I'm not sure Led Zeppelin ever did it. Led Zeppelin 3 is not a phenomenal record. Led Zeppelin 1, 2, and 4 are pretty fantastic, but I don't know. And I don't know about Joni Mitchell. I mean, you think so, but Joni Mitchell, you could say, I don't know, Ladies of the Canyon, Blue, and For the Roses.
Oh, well, you see, I would say Court and Spark, Hissing of Summer Lawns, and Hejira.
Yeah, no, that's
they're the kind of sophisticated pop Joni Mitchell records, aren't they?
Yeah.
Faintly jazzy. A lot of Jacob Pastorius, and, you know, they'll feel like Los Angeles records, you know. They've all got that kind of cool to them.
Yes.
I think those do work as a trilogy. And I very often, if I play one, I tend to play another, you know. It tends to naturally lead to another one. So anyway, if anybody's got any further suggestions for other trilogies that we haven't mentioned, do get in touch.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
So Madonna's got a legal problem, Mark, is that right?
This is a fantastic story, I think. Somebody went to see her in Los Angeles last week, is suing her on various counts. I think it's a really interesting story. He said, firstly, he said he considered that a lot of the act was pornography without warning. So he was forced to watch topless women on stage simulating sex acts, and this somehow emotionally triggered him, and he wasn't prepared for it. He said that he was complaining about the temperature because she wouldn't allow the air conditioning to be on, and it became uncomfortably hot, and he became ill, he said. He he claims that she was lip syncing. So he paid all that money, and she was basically there just with a load of dancers not actually singing. And also suing because the show was meant to start at 8 and I think didn't start until 10 o'clock. I thought it was a really interesting case. I mean, this guy can't win. I don't think on any of these counts, because you can't argue that you're going to see Madonna without being vaguely aware of what it is you're letting yourself in for. Because if people were to successfully sue artists for being emotionally triggered by the content of their songs, I don't know what anyone would be able to play. But I do think one interesting point is about the lateness. You and I have talked about this before, because is there any other branch of entertainment where it's legitimate to go on 2 hours after your advertised start time? Imagine you went to see a classical concert or an opera or a football match and said, I'm sorry, yeah, it's meant to start at 2 o'clock, but actually they probably won't be on until about 3:30. I mean, apart from the fact that, you've got to get home and a lot of people are going to miss the second half because it started so late, etc. Like, it is pretty extraordinary. But that's part of the whole notion of rock and roll, isn't it? The idea that if you do turn up on time, that somehow contradicts the attitude you ought to have, which is the attitude you ought to have is that you don't care that much. And then whenever you're good and ready to go on stage is the right time, a.k.a. the Stones at Nebworth, an hour and a half late at a festival. So, what do you think?
I think there's literally never an excuse for lateness. Literally never. It just isn't one, because there's no excuse. There is only one reason you're late. It's because you can't be asked to go on stage at the time that it says on the ticket, because it doesn't suit you for one reason or another. It doesn't happen in the theatre. It doesn't happen in anything else. It would be considered just absolutely, completely beyond the pale to even talk about it in the world of the theatre. As
I
you
went
say,
on a world tour with Rihanna. Do you remember that in
Yeah.
2012 or what it was, on a press trip, the 777 press trip, where she played 7 concerts in 7 countries in 7 days. And she was pretty much routinely 6 hours late each time. And I just thought, this is absurd. You know, there were times when she was expected to be on stage in Canada, and I think we had barely taken off from Mexico, you know. And I think their excuse was they were free concerts because it was a publicity thing, so it's free. And therefore, because it's free, it's kind of like, well, you're very lucky that we're playing at all. We could turn up whenever we want.
Yeah,
I just thought it was absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, and particularly it seems in this day and age, you know, I always think about this when I go to football nowadays. It's not that very often. You know, if you go to Premier League football, you can be outside the ground 10 minutes to go and you'll be in your seat when the kickoff takes place. You know what I mean? It could not be more efficient. You know what I mean? Whereas, you know, getting into kind of music gigs and so forth is a far more difficult business. You know, they've never smartened up their act really on that score. So, you know, if this guy ends up in court, arguing against Madonna, and he's looking for a supporting witness, I'll put my hand up. I'll pay my own fare to go, because I think it's bloody ridiculous, you know. But it's never going to happen, is it, at all? And to be fair, you can't claim that you were shocked by the nudity. You know, you're taken aback, you know, when you spent 2 hours sitting there amongst the audience, you know, because you could have worked it out what was going to happen at the end of 2 hours, couldn't you?
But also, it's the idea that anybody goes to see anything without having some idea of what they're letting themselves in for is preposterous. I mean, it's just an interesting case. I thought it was fascinating.
Why were we talking about the bands who had the most members in them? Oh, it's Danny Baker sent me this email.
And also, Dexy's been that runners because I did that interview with Nigel Tassel for the podcast about his book. And I think Dexy's had 53 members and he'd interviewed 24 of them. But yeah, what did Danny say?
According to Danny, there have been over the years 179 people in blood, sweat and tears. You know, who were always a pretty kind of populous group, weren't they, even at the beginning? Because there was large horn sections. So it's a bit more like, I don't know, it was more like the Stan Kenton big band than Led Zeppelin, wasn't it, really? And so when you have loads of horn players, you tend to go through a lot of horn players, don't you? You know, you get new ones all the time. And so 179 people have at one time or another been members of Blood, Sweat and Tears. Now, the Fall have had considerable...
Fall 66.
Is it really?
It's pretty fantastic. Has anyone written a book about that? That would be a good book. It must have been done. Track down all 66 members.
Somebody must have done that.
Drifters 67, Santana 68.
Really?
The Waterboys 76. I can't believe that one. There's a group who I've never heard of because they're a Japanese music idol girl group called AKB48. Who have supposedly had 292 members. But that's obviously just a kind of, little brand that is out there earning furiously.
But then there are the groups who have never changed lineup, you know, the other end of the scale, who I was kind of, I thought was interesting. So the obvious one is U2, who haven't, you know, although when they played
they had a different drummer because I think
recently
Larry had a back operation or something.
Yeah, whatever.
That's right, that is still extraordinary.
It is.
When did they form? 76 or something? Or was it earlier?
Yeah, it'd be something like that.
So they're going virtually 50 years with the same lineup. It is absolutely amazing. And a great credit to them.
Absolutely.
Incredible.
But doesn't it show that, you know, the groups that last nowadays, and there are quite a few of these, they have a very different attitude, you know, that they realize the importance of sticking together. Coldplay are another case, aren't they, really? Which you would have thought by now, had this been the 70s or the 80s, Chris Martin would have wandered off, wouldn't he? You know what I mean? If there's been a previous era. But he hasn't. Has he? He hasn't done anything. He hasn't done anything on his own, has he? Really?
Don't think he has, no.
It's all just Coldplay.
But they've probably got that kind of financial arrangement as well, which U2 certainly have, I think. I can't remember what U2's arrangement is, but I think they either split it quarter.
Well, I don't know whether it's split in quarters, but it's certainly split,
Yeah.
But also Radiohead.
Radiohead, absolutely.
Same thing. I mean,
part of their appeal, I think.
Yes, it is.
I really do feel that. You feel that they're this little gang, don't you?
Muse, same thing.
The Strokes, I think.
The Strokes, Kings of Leon. And I was interested to see that although they haven't been together consistently all the time, they are together now, and with still the same lineup. Aha, which is not necessarily what you would have thought.
Have they reformed? This is.
I think they've been playing. They've been playing in recent years.
I love that.
There you go.
It's fantastic.
So there are those groups, and there are also
ones with no original
members at all,
which is very interesting because if you look at the list of those, that they're all sort of brands, aren't they?
Kansas.
Kansas. Leonard Skinner, which is yeah. Yes. Again, if you think about Yes, I always thought Yes being like a jazz band, really. That the whole thing was changing members and just being kind of fluid.
I suppose
in the one at the moment, but he wasn't in the original, was he? So
no, but he was not long afterwards, was he? He was pretty nearly. It was the third album, wasn't he? He was already there. Heart. Heart. Is that right? So
surely the two girls are the absolute
right
centre of this whole concept, aren't they? So I guess they're not in it. I think Heart's got no original members.
I can't. Oh shit! Nancy Wilson's actually announced her own version of Heart in 2022 amid a lengthy hiatus before the sisters finally reunited. So yes, they are back together again. The Little River Band. So Blood, Sweat and Tears now have no original members, but there is a Thin Lizzy, and the Hollies. That's sort of extraordinary. So the Hollies exist without any original
Hollies.
Oh, but they've got Tony Hicks and Bobby Elliott, who were not in the absolute original group.
And I think there's a version of Humble Pie, which is extraordinary.
It is. Can there be a version of Humble Pie without Jerry Shirley on the drums? Surely that is just wrongity wrong, isn't it?
But I am assuming that anybody going to see doesn't care.
Yeah.
They just want to hear a certain thing, played a certain way.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
So there you are. If you've got anything to add or subtract from that conversation, please do so.
The Word Podcast. 2 cocoa tins and a piece of string.
An interesting story last week about a Grateful Dead fan who died at the age of 71, who's very, very well known in America, a guy called Bill Walton, and was a basketball celebrity and a very famous basketball coach, and a big part of the Grateful Dead community. And I think he's written some sleeve notes on some of their records, and had been to, and this really is astonishing, he'd been to over 1,000 Grateful Dead gigs. God. We were doing the quiz last night and just asking various people who were on the Word in Your Ear quiz what the most number of gigs they've been to. And I think some people have been to see 60 Springsteens, there have been 30 Dylans. I've seen Bob Dylan 30 times, which I feel is a lot, but 1,000, Dave. 1,000. Now, clearly this guy could have started quite early. He could have started back in, I don't know, he's old enough to have been going to see the Grateful Dead since the late 60s. But by the same token, to have seen 1,000 gigs, you're talking about seeing, what is that? 56 years or something. You're seeing about 18, 20 shows a year. It's absolutely astonishing. And the other thing is he's 7 foot tall, and therefore, on occasions, was brought up to watch the band from the side of the stage because they couldn't have him in the audience because nobody behind him could see anything.
Absolutely.
A great advantage.
Yeah.
But what's the most number of times you've been to see any one act?
I saw Bruce Springsteen quite a lot, but it wouldn't be more than 30, I wouldn't have thought. But I suppose also people just have such long careers nowadays. So it becomes a kind of form of train spotting, doesn't it? That if somebody's on tour, I've got to see them, you know what I mean? Or I'm kind of letting them down in some way, So it's a bit more like football support.
But that wears off. My wife was like that when Dylan used to come to England. She'd try and see as many shows she could all around the country. Then it was just all the London shows. And then it was just the first and last of the London shows. Then it was one London show. And now it's, oh, is he coming again? Oh, okay. We might go, we might not, I don't know. It's going to be expensive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Might be hard to get a ticket.
Yeah.
So changing.
So talking of live performance, Mark, have you noted Eddie Izzard? See, I'm surprised you haven't been, because I know you live quite near.
I live very near it. Yes,
Eddie Izzard is offering the extraordinary experience of performing the whole of Hamlet, albeit somewhat cut, single-handed at the Riverside Studios. Isn't that right? It's only down the road, Mark.
Worst reviews that we have ever seen. We've been sending each other, haven't we? Reviews that we found. This one's even worse.
I'm just going to read.
Never mind murder at the heart of Hamlet. This production feels like its own massacre.
I'm just going to read the headlines of a load of these reviews. The Guardian. Hamlet review. One-woman juggling act exposes limits of Eddie Izzard's acting ability. Evening Standard. Eddie Izzard's Hamlet, an act of colossal vanity and hubris.
That's right.
Financial Times. Eddie Izzard plays all the roles in a nimble but aimless production. The Telegraph. A rather average Eddie Izzard fits-all performance. iNews. Shallow vanity project. And then it just goes on like that. It's absolutely extraordinary. I've never read such a series of critical kickings in all my life.
They really are vicious. And the interesting thing was, I looked this up, and this started in America, that he was actually doing this show in January right through to March. I think he was doing it in Greenwich House Theatre in New York. And I'm fairly sure, Dave, that it got such positive reviews that the show was extended twice. So it's really interesting, isn't it? Because Americans looked at that and thought it was a really exceptional and extraordinary thing. We obviously have a different view of, maybe I just have a different view of Eddie Izzard, who I love, actually. I love Eddie Izzard. I think his comedy, her comedy, as we must call her, is fantastic. But you could also argue that Eddie Izzard tends to take on things that are a kind of a personal challenge. This is the guy who didn't he do 27 marathons in 27 days, and then he did 50 marathons in 50 days. So that's all about particular mountains he wants to climb. And you feel that this is something that he's seen from his own point of view. I can do the whole of Hamlet single-handed, all the parts, rather than the point of view of what the audience might make of it. I mean, because he has got the most massive panic. The Standard said something like, I've seen a musical about pornographic wallpaper. I've seen a play that a lone producer decided to perform when his cast failed to turn up. Those were arguably worse ideas than this solo tragedy from Eddie Izzard. But he's one person at Hamlet, as he said, is a colossal vanity and hubris project, hung on the skimpiest artistic justification. Also, he changes the words, doesn't he?
Well, he adds the odd bit.
He says, "To be or not to be" is not the only one that's been butchered. The text, I think edited by his brother, actually, her brother, is most judiciously edited, but difficult words like mobled or hectic are excised, and git, bonce, and bugger are added. So it's very.
It made me think of one question though, which is, if you go see a piece of entertainment, and you're kind of expecting there to be more than one person involved in it, you go with a lighter heart, don't you, than if you're going to see one person.
Yeah,
it's the same thing with musicians.
Yes.
If somebody was coming over to play, I don't know, I can't think of an example. Do you get more excited about the idea of going to see Bruce Springsteen playing an acoustic set on his own than you get going to see him with a band? I don't think you do at all. Right? Because it's almost always just harder work, And so,
there's more people to,
if you go and see,
share the burden.
Go and see the most challenging version of Hamlet, the least cut version of Hamlet you can possibly imagine. And you can be bored to tears by whatever's going on stage at the time. But that within a few minutes, somebody will have come on.
Someone else will have come on.
And there will have been a fight or something. There have been somebody attractive or whatever. Whereas if you're stuck with one person for the next 2 hours, you tend to get rather bad-tempered about it.
But also, aren't you forced into a position where the only thing you can judge is the technical achievement itself? It would be incredibly hard to see Eddie Izzard on stage doing her version of this play alone and react emotionally to what the play itself.
Oh no, you wouldn't be doing that at all.
You just wouldn't. You'd be sitting there thinking, "How long can she keep going?" How long can this take to learn?
There is only one case I think of where I saw a live performer on his own, and I thought, this is fantastic, and I don't want anybody else on the stage. I saw Neil Young at Hammersmith Odeon. However long ago this must be, I don't know. It's 25, 30 years ago, something. And he appeared on the bare stage at Hammersmith. I think you could see the brickwork at the back of the stage.
Wasn't this the Greendale show?
No, it was not. No, it was years before that. And he played the acoustic guitar, and he had a headset, so he could just wander around the stage, I'm pretty sure, and just banged hell out this acoustic guitar and sang, out of the blue and all that kind of stuff. And he was just fantastic. And you never thought, I wish Crazy Horse would come on. You didn't think that at all. But that is a rare case.
Example. Yeah.
Normally you just need some light and shade, don't you?
The thing that I thought was that it must be so hard. Eddie Izzard, she will have read those reviews and has to go on stage tonight and on stage tomorrow night and on stage, I think, till June the 30th. And that must take a lot of... Everybody says that, they try to pretend they don't read reviews, but how can you not, and how can it not affect you? I don't know if you remember, Dave, in the days when we used to do Old Grey Whistle Test. Occasionally we used to get reviewed. I can remember some brutal things in Melody Maker and Zigzag about us. And I can remember going out there thinking, gosh, there are 2.75 million people watching, and you're looking into the camera and you're thinking, have they all read that review? And do they all agree with it?
Well, I don't read reviews. They interesting. Jerry Seinfeld has been doing a lot of publicity recently for his film on Netflix. He always says he goes looking for the worst reviews of his stuff, to see if he can bear it, and reads it, because his attitude is it's one person, it's just one person. And of course, you and I have been the one person, so we know it's one person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I found this the other day. So actually, you just reminded me. I was knowing we were going to talk about this Eddie Izzard thing. I went looking for cases where critical pannings have proved to be controversial or whatever, and I found a load of stuff on I think the BBC website, and this was 10 cases where music critics got it so wrong. And guess what? I'm in there.
For what? Oh, right. Go on.
I'm in there for Dexy's Midnight Runners, because...
What did they quote that you'd said? Was it your thing in the face about it's hard to listen to this record without sniggering behind your hand?
I can't remember where it was.
I can remember one of your reviews. I'm quoting it. Yeah.
I've written negative stuff about Dexy's Midnight Runners, and listen, I would do it again tomorrow, no problem at all. Because I haven't changed my mind about Dexy's Midnight Runners. But here's the only thing, the only relevant thing about me and Dexys and Midnight Runners. I don't like them. Okay?
You don't, absolutely.
It's just me. I don't like
When
them. I don't say that anybody else isn't allowed to like them. You know, the thing you have to remember about critical opinion is other opinions are available. Some of them could be your own. You know what I mean? Exactly. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And particularly in this day and age when literally nobody's reading them. You know what I mean? Because the days when millions of people opened the Times and said, I want to say what people have said about Eddie Izzard is long gone. You know, it's moved into a totally different world. And yet people still seem so bothered about it. I still get people to get in touch with me and say, oh, you must really regret what you said about it.
You must have been sitting for the last 40 years with your head under a giant cushion thinking, do I dare go over? I said something unkind about Johnny hates jazz, and now
it doesn't matter. Really
when I interviewed Nigel Tassel for our podcast about his Dexy's book, I said, Dave can't do it, actually. And I'm not even sure if he was available if he would do it, actually, because Dave just doesn't like Dexys. Yeah, really. No. Dave described them as the most risible act in rock and roll history. And Nigel was a pause, and I said, oh, I wish I'd known that. I would have slapped that on the cover. Great cover quote. Most risible act in rock and roll history, D. Hepworth. Must read this.
It doesn't mean, to be fair, I've got Nigel's book, and I will look at it because it doesn't mean I'm not interested. I'm really,
of course,
I'm interested in loads of things. I can't keep a straight face, you know.
I know.
In the company of, because also Dexys are one of those acts nowadays that are kind of disgusting, kind of. In hushed tones and
reverential tones.
And I'm always the one at the back of the class that goes, well, they're sniggering. Oh, come on. For goodness sake.
I know.
But that's just my problem, you know. But so maybe Eddie will be going on stage this evening at Hammersmith. And, with a light heart, it probably find a way of working it into Hamlet. I would have thought, that seems like the obvious thing to do.
But also there's that element of, you must be sitting there thinking there are people who have come along now because they've come to see a car crash. They come to see, it's so bad that it's fascinating. If you got back if I'd been to see Eddie Izzard last night, you'd be very keen to hear what it was like.
I would.
Was it really as terrible as they said it was?
In fact, listeners, let's all club together. For the price of a ticket, Mark Allen can get on his bike and be down at Hammersmith Riverside Studios this evening in time for the next performance. And he can report back next week on how it's been. Will you do that, Mark? I'm sure you will.
I might.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.